Man, video games are fun. But what if there was a way to make them more fun? Maybe like a useless piece of plastic meant to enhance a gaming experience. What the heck is touching my leg? Oh, snap a Rob. Sure, why not? Hey there! Plastic garbage! This stuff floods the video game market, but the only reason this stuff keeps getting pumped out is because you got idiots like me who keep buying it. Video game accessories have been around since the beginning of time, i.e. 1972. The Magnavox Odyssey, for those not in the know, was the first ever home video game console. It was a pretty basic console. The controller had two knobs on it that controlled the X and Y coordinates of a little white dot on a black background. Now, while this was the most revolutionary thing since the printing press, the engineers at Magnavox thought that this was just a bit too boring, so they decided to do something to spice things up a bit. Yeah! Yes, probably considered the first video game accessory ever. Odyssey games came with a screen overlay that simulated graphics. These things were completely useless, but the Odyssey did have a light gun. Ah, yeah, a video game accessory. The gun wasn't the only accessory the Odyssey had. In fact, most of the Odyssey's library had their own unique accessories. But looking at a lot of them, you start to realize that the Magnavox Odyssey is less of a video game console and more of a digital board game device. And that's about as exciting as video game accessories get for a while. I mean, the Atari 2600 had paddle controllers for games like Pong and Breakout. But I mean, other than that, accessories didn't really become interesting until the mid-1980s with the NES and Sega Master System. Out of the two, the NES definitely had more interesting accessories, so I'm going to talk about them. Now, we can't talk about the NES without talking about the Robotic Operating Buddy, or Rob for people who aren't completely insane. Nowadays, Rob is most known for his appearance in the Super Smash Bros. Games, but back in 1985, he was used for playing Gyromite and Stack Up. Despite being the flagship accessory for the NES, this thing was heavily underused. That's probably because it wasn't very good, but another accessory that had the exact opposite problem to Rob was the Zapper. The Zapper, just like the Odyssey's 12 gauge over there, was a light gun, and just like Rob, the Zapper had launched with the NES back in 1985. It was an all-gray gun, but after a lawsuit in 1989, the gun's barrel and handle were changed to a red color. Now, it's pretty easy to see how from a distance the Zapper could look like a real gun, but the guy who sued Nintendo would have pissed himself if he saw what Japan got for their Zapper. Now, there were other accessories besides Rob and the Zapper, accessories like the 4-player adapter and the Game Genie. In 1987, Nintendo launched the Famicom 3D system in Japan. The NES also had a chair. But how about the Power Glove? Yeah, this thing stunk. But how about the Power Pad? Most notably used with world-class track meet, the Power Pad was basically large buttons on a mat that you would run and jump on. It could be seen as a spiritual predecessor to the home DDR mats, but it does have a true successor that I'll get into later. Moving on to the SNES, accessories were a lot less prevalent than they were on the NES, but you did have the usual Game Genie 4-player splitter, but there was also a mouse. Yes, the SNES mouse was a mouse that was used on the Super Nintendo. It was famously packed in with Mario Paint and a plastic mouse pad. Now, I've lost the mouse pad somehow, but I still have Mario Paint. I also have another game that's compatible with the mouse, that is Vegas Stakes. This game also works perfectly fine with a standard controller, but the mouse is here if you want it. Another big accessory for the Super Nintendo was the Super Game Boy. This thing works fine enough, but if you want to play Game Boy games on your TV, then I suggest you either buy an aftermarket console or the Game Boy player for the GameCube. The Super Nintendo also had the Super Scope, which was the successor to the Zapper, and it returns to the all-gray color scheme of the original Zapper, except this time there's an orange tip. This thing works roughly the same way the Zapper did, but this time there's a sensor bar for a bit more precise aiming. Now, in 1994, Nintendo was finally overthrown as the champion of video games by Sony with the original PlayStation. Now, the PlayStation had the usual accessories, a light gun, the 4-player multiplayer adapter, but there's one accessory that the original PlayStation popularized that became a staple for just about every other video game console to follow. The racing wheel. Everybody and their mother owns some kind of device that can use a steering wheel. Almost everything has a steering wheel. Xbox, PlayStation, PC, even the original GBA has its own freaky little wheel. The wheel I own was primarily marketed as a PS2 accessory, but it doesn't read as a DualShock 2 controller, it reads as a DualShock 1 controller. So games like Crash Tag Team Racing, which requires the use of a DualShock 2, can't be played, but a PS1 game like Crash Team Racing, yeah, it works. Hello, sir. You have 3 days to live. Huh. Hello, sir. You have to talk about memory cards again. Along with making the racing wheel popular, the PS1 made memory cards popular for a while. Most early disc-based consoles required the use of a memory card. A small handful, like the original Xbox and Sega Saturn, made the memory cards optional, but it still doesn't mean that it's not a total nightmare when you get a new console and can't save anything because you don't have a stupid piece of plastic. Thankfully, the Nintendo 64 doesn't have this problem. The N64 did have memory cards, but all of the games were cartridges, so the data could be saved within them. A very small handful of games had to use the memory card, but not enough to warrant the feeling of needing the card. The Nintendo 64's memory card plugged into this port on the back of the controller. This port was also used by the N64 Rumble Pack and the Game Boy Transfer Pack for use on games like Pokemon Stadium and Mario Golf. Now, game accessories weren't just limited to home consoles, handhelds were allowed to get in on the fun too. And nowhere is this more prevalent than the Game Boy line. Most of the accessories I own go to one of the 2 Game Boy Advance systems, but Game Boy accessories stayed pretty much the same all the way down to the original model. Travel cases were pretty big with Nintendo handhelds as a whole. The Game Boy, DS, even the Switch has a travel case. The most interesting case I have is this Game Boy fanny pack that I use to hold most of my Game Boy accessories. I have some pretty standard Game Boy accessories, stuff like a light, thighs, power bank, a link cable, a car charger, and I also have this converter for the SP that adds a headphone jack to the system. Now, because the Game Boy has so many accessories, I was honestly kinda surprised at how few DS accessories there are. The reason the DS has so few accessories is because most of them use the GBA port on the original and light models of the system, and a pretty good chunk of them actually never left Japan. But when it comes to accessories the DS does have, the DS has a keyboard, there's a headset, there was an internet browser, and there was this Pokemon LCD thing that I have no idea what it's used for. There was also this camera, just like the Game Boy one, which reminds me, I'd like to take this time to shout out the Xbox 360 Kinect and the PS2 iToy. Yeah, I'll go into greater detail on these things at a later date, I just wanted to remind you that they exist. But probably the most recognizable DS accessory that used the GBA port was the Guitar Hero add-on. But I don't own one of those yet, so I'm going to talk about alternative styluses instead. The DS stylus. Everybody's favorite piece of the DS to lose. These things were small, compact, and some people found these things extremely uncomfortable. I'd like to go on record saying that I am not one of those people, but it is pretty obvious to see where they're coming from. I feel like a good place to start when talking about alternative styluses would be to talk about Nintendo's offerings. When the DSi XL was announced, it was very apparent that Nintendo was marketing this thing to the crowd that would pick Brain Age over Mario Kart. So Nintendo included a fountain pen stylus with the system. This thing is actually really comfortable, and if I hated the stock stylus with every fiber of my being, I would probably use this thing a lot more. Now, when it comes to third-party styluses, most of them were either just different versions of what Nintendo did, or they would have some kind with this little thing on top, like this Mario one I have, or this Tails one that I would literally kill to own. For the most part, third-party styluses were pretty tame, until they weren't. Yes, the notorious Mew Penis Stylus. It was a promotional item in Japan for something Pokemon related, but I don't care about Pokemon enough to find out. Now, while I think it would be funny to own one of these in the future, trust me, I keep checking eBay, I could always substitute it with this baby Mario stylus. Now, before I continue, I would like to take a moment of silence for myself and any other poor soul who had this thing back in the DS's prime.
Okay, time for me to talk about why I hate this thing.
2 words. Top heavy. This thing is a bobblehead you are expected to write with. That is an unimaginable amount of not fun. This thing is cool for like the first few minutes of use, and then, you know what? I'm not even gonna finish that sentence.
Alright, I think that's everything. I mean, I could talk about the Nintendo Switch and its accessories, but there's not really anything noteworthy there. Yeah, I think I'll call it good there. The heck is that noise? No. No. No, 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 no! No!